The high demand for organ transplants is an issue that the medical community has been dealing with for a long time.
In 1954, a young plastic surgeon who just come back from training in cancer in New York came there, and the opportunity to transplant a kidney from a healthy kidney from an identical twin to his identical twin brother who was dying of failure of his own organs came up, and it worked very well. And the patient recovered. He was dying, totally dying. Recovered, married his nurse, had a couple of kids, lived for a long time thereafter, a perfectly normal life.
As of January 2023, more than 107,000 people in the U.S. alone were on a waiting list for organ transplants. These numbers by the United Network for Organ Sharing show how bad the discrepancy between supply and demand is in a life or death situation. When the conditions are so dire, no solution is completely off the table, including the universally controversial practice of cloning. Do we have the technology and knowledge of biology to use cloning so we can help people who need organ transplants get what they need? And even if we do, is cloning ethically the right thing to do? Organ transplants are a difficult medical practice. Firstly, there are not enough organ donors to meet the rising global demand for them. More than 42,800 organ transplants were performed in 2022, setting a record. That's a 3.7% increase compared to 2021. 25,000 of these operations were kidney transplants, which was another annual record. Even if the rising demand was not an issue, there are risks inherent to organ transplants that make the problem even harder to navigate through.
So the next problem, of course, was how to do it between genetically dissimilar donor-recipient pairs. We can't transplant skin. No matter what we do, it rejects. But somehow, if you transplant an entire so-called composite graft, that's skin and fat and muscle and bone and nerve, it works. And it works rather well. And some of these face transplants, as you know, have been absolutely spectacular.
There is no guarantee that the recipient's body will accept the organ even if the operation is a success. So, can cloning be used to solve this global problem? There is no denying that cloning is a hot-button issue in the field of medicine. Amazing things were achieved by cloning animals in the past. But the same thing is yet to be done with humans. Why? Because there is no good enough reason to do so. At its core, it's hard to justify cloning a human philosophically. The nature of reproduction is not something to take lightly. The justification we are looking for might be the fact that so many people need organ transplantation to improve their quality of life and, more importantly, survive. There are two ways we can go with this: reproductive cloning or therapeutic cloning. Reproductive cloning involves the creation of new, identical organisms that have identical nuclear genetic material to the donor. We can use this to create new humans that have the organs we need. Think of it like having a spare twin that can donate whatever organ you need. This is how reproductive cloning goes. A mature somatic cell is removed from the person that will be cloned. Then, the DNA from the somatic cell is transferred into an egg cell whose own DNA-containing nucleus is removed. The egg is then developed into an early-stage embryo in a test tube, which later gets implanted into a female womb. Dolly the sheep should ring a bell. Sounds great on paper, but there is no way this method would fly in the current medical climate, considering it violates several ethical principles. This method almost certainly involves the cloning of a human that will later be sacrificed for the survival of the recipient. That's why therapeutic cloning is a more promising method. In therapeutic cloning, no twin is created. Instead, we could clone organs by producing and harvesting embryos. Then, by extracting the stem cells from these embryos and stimulating them to grow into the desired tissue, we can create whole organs. Granted, making these cells grow into the desired organ will take work, but it is entirely possible. Organ cloning might start a new age in medicine and transform the practice of organ transplants as we know it. By mastering the reproduction of our own organs, we can conquer the organ failure problem that has been plaguing our world. But do you think this practice would take something away from the experience of being a human and push us towards transhumanism? Let us know what you think in the comments.